My name is Miriam Vale. I am 67, a widow, and for 3 years, there has been only one place where the air still feels shaped to my lungs, the timber cabin perched above a small lake outside Telluride, Colorado. My late husband Alec and I raised it from ground and weather rough sawn beams, a roof we argued over, and then loved windows that learned where the light would fall. We left a fingerprint in every nail. The drive had never felt punishing, not even in snow. That afternoon it lengthened like a question I didn't want to answer. I brought only a weekend bag in Alec's enamel mug, white, with a navy rim and a hairline crack like a pale vein. I never drink from it without thinking of his hands warming around it. I set it on the passenger seat where I could glance and steady myself the way you check your reflection before you walk into a room that matters. When the tree line opened, the cabin roof cut a clean line against the sky. My shoulders loosened by habit. Then I heard something that didn't belong to my silence, laughter relaxed and unhurried drifting from the porch. I froze halfway up the steps. My son Thomas sat in Alec's rocker, one ankle thrown over the other as if the chair had waited for him. The rocker is pine hand sanded smooth one July, when the heat made the resin lift and shine. Thomas held a glass of red wine phone bright in his other hand. Marina, his wife, leaned back beside him, glossy hair pinned like a magazine spread. Across from them, Gregory and Ruth, Marina's parents, looked as if they had been born to occupy other people's porches, comfortable, surveying, already arranging the world to suit them. 4 glasses, 4 bodies at ease. The porch that had been my sanctuary suddenly held company that did not include me. A memory cracked open as neatly as a log under a sharp axe. A winter morning years ago, steam slipping from Alec's mug while he told me, "This is the spot I'll wait for you every day. Bring the tea and I'll bring the weather report," tapping the ridgeline with his finger. His laugh hung there warm and ordinary. Back to the present. Thomas lifted his eyes. He didn't startle, he didn't even rise. "Mom," he said, voice flat, almost practiced. "You can't come here anymore. We've given the cabin to Marina's parents. It's their place now." The sentence struck with the dull weight of a stone. The world kept its shape, boards, rail sky, but some hinge inside me shifted. I looked at the rocker, at the cup of someone else's wine where my husband's tea used to sit, and at my son, the only child Alec and I raised, with more hope than sleep, telling me I no longer belonged in the house. My hands had scrubbed the eaves, my shoulders had learned to lift. I could have argued. My mouth knew every date, every payment, every winter we mended pipes with stiff fingers. Instead, my face moved into something that looked like surrender, a small, steady smile. It felt like setting down a heavy box, not because you're finished, but because you're choosing where to grip next. No one followed me off the porch. Gravel sounded sharp beneath my shoes. I placed the weekend bag on the back seat and set the enamel mug in its ring. When I started the car, the radio stayed off. I drove with the kind of attention you give a tightrope. Eyes forward, breath measured, both hands on the wheel. The mug rattled softly whenever the road roughened, a thin reminder of what breaks and still holds. Mountains flattened into long plains. Pines gave way to billboards. I kept hearing the sentence again as if the highway were passing it back to me. "You can't come here anymore." The words tried to name me smaller. The crack in the mug flashed in stray light and looked like a map. By the time I reached my bungalow in Boulder, evening had lowered the color of the day. The hall light stuttered once before finding itself. Lavender cleaner lingered. It smelled like effort more than home. I put the bag on the bench, carried the mug to the kitchen, and set it beside a framed photo of Alex standing in front of the cabin, with his hair caught by sun and his grin caught by me. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "We're moving in for good next weekend. Don't come back." No greeting, no apology, just a line meant to shut a door. Humiliation arrived first, bright as a match. Grief came second, heavier and without flame. Under both, a third thing lifted its head, steady and unsentimental. I sat at the table and laid my palm along the mug's rim, finding the crack with my thumb. Alec once refused to replace it when I suggested we buy a new one. "A crack's not the end of a thing," he'd said, blowing across his tea. "It's evidence. Evidence of what I had asked. That it's been useful," he said, "and that it's still here." I let the word evidence circle the room like a small bird finding its perch. Then I rose, opened the hall closet, and pulled down a gray binder labeled, in my tidy hand, Miriam Vale Living Trust. We had signed it years ago because Alec was a man who believed in oiling hinges before they squeaked. I set the binder on the table and placed the mug beside it. The two looked like a pear, paper, and iron plan in memory. I did not cry. I made tea and didn't drink it. I watered the basil on the sill and misted the ferns. I straightened the dish towel Alec had always left crooked, and for once I left it crooked too. I am a woman who spent 3 decades running a classroom and then another running a home through sickness and the long afterward. I can do mornings and I can do ledgers. I can also do no. Allowed to test the shape of it in my mouth, I said no. It did not echo. It settled. The house seemed to hear it and approve. I took out receipts, roofing taxes, repairs that had no glamour but all the weight. I placed a yellow sticky on the inside cover of the trust binder with 3 neat lines. Certify trust. Record notice. Save every message. I wasn't planning a scene. I was planning a boundary. There is a difference. I had learned to use silence to avoid trouble. I would now use it to hold a line. The phone lay face down, screen dark. The simple discipline of not picking it up felt like a small reclaimed acre. Through the window, the streetlights came on one by one. A delivery truck groaned past. Somewhere a neighbor laughed in the soft way people do when they are not holding anything heavy. I left Alex's chair in the corner, angled toward the window. I never sit in it. I dust it. I oil it. I keep it ready. I sat on the sofa instead and let the quiet climb onto the cushion beside me without asking questions. There are days grief is a flood, and days it is a cup that is not full and not empty, just there. This was the second kind. I held it without spilling. Later, I washed the enamel mug and set it on the rack to dry. Water slipped along the crack and then away. In the study books, Alec had underlined, "Waited like men at a train platform." I touched one spine and said, "We're still here." It felt important to use the plural, even alone. Back in the kitchen, I slid the trust binder beneath the photograph, not to hide it, but to anchor both. The clock over the stove ticked with the patience of inexpensive things. When the hour hand moved, I breathed with it. I did one more small task that looked like nothing and felt like something. I wrote my name on a blank index card and tucked it into the binder pocket. A name in the right place is an instrument. A signature is just its music. By the time the kettle clicked itself quiet, the house had changed. Not the furniture, not the paint, not the way the floor creaked near the pantry. Only the temperature of the air that gathers around a decision. It wasn't courage exactly. It was clarity. Tomorrow I would make calls. Tonight I would let quiet be my spine. Outside, a car door shut. Tires whispered away and the street went back to ordinary. I turned off the lights, leaving the one over the sink. It threw a small circle on the enamel mug where it dried a pale halo on a thing that had already proved it could survive a fall. I went to bed without rehearsing the next argument. I didn't need an argument. I needed a line. And I had drawn it. By morning, the line I'd drawn had cooled into something stronger than adrenaline. It felt like a rail sunk deep, plain load-bearing, not meant to be admired so much as trusted. I boiled water, set Alex's enamel mug on the counter, and opened the gray binder Miriam Vale Living Trust. The pages gave off the mild smell of paper dust and storing. I read slowly, the way you read instructions for a machine you'll have to fix alone at night. I made a list in block letters. Call attorney, call county, keep records. There was a steadiness in the handwriting I hadn't seen in months. I dialed the county clerk first. A receptionist with a mountain town patience told me what could be recorded and how. Then I called a number Evelyn, my neighbor across the alley, had pressed on a slip of paper months ago. If you ever need a lawyer who actually listens, a woman named Adrienne A. Park answered herself. She had a voice like a carpenter's level quiet true. She could see me at 3. The day moved in tidy clicks, shower cardigans, sensible shoes. 3 copies of everything in a neat manila folder. I ate toast because eating something felt like respect for the body I would be using to carry this plan. At noon, when the house settled into the blessed lull that always comes after morning noise, I almost slept. Then the memory of the porch, the 4 glasses, the leisurely ease sat up in my chest. I made tea I did not drink and reached for the tablet I used to watch birds at the cabin. After Alec died, I had installed 2 small trail cameras to see foxes and finches when the quiet felt too wide. He would have liked that I learned to run them. The app opened to a still frame of the cabin's porch pine needles gathered in the corners like little green commas. The network icons were stingy but alive. I tapped refresh and then live view. For a moment, nothing. Then the image sharpened into motion, Thomas pacing the boards with a restlessness I recognized from his childhood. Marina sat with her knees tucked under a phone pressed between her palms as if it might warm. "I'm telling you, we can't keep circling this," she said. The microphone on the camera was cheap, but urgency carries. My parents can't sign another short lease. They need a roof they don't have to beg for every 6 months. "It's not ours to give," Thomas said, but he said it like a man trying to convince himself after the decision has already been made a dozen times in his head. "Your mother barely uses it." Marina's voice thinned. "It's selfish to sit on a place like this when people we love are unpacking groceries at a motel." The words landed the way snow lands, soft and then heavy. I held the rim of the mug and watched my son look past the camera toward the lake as if the water could solve a math problem he had never learned to show his work on. "She'll be furious," he said. "She'll grieve," Marina answered. "Then she'll get over it. She always does when it comes to you." That hurt in a clean way, like antiseptic. There was truth on her tongue about how many times I had smoothed covered paid. Love had blurred into subsidy. Subsidy had pretended to be love. I pressed 2 fingers to my sternum until my breath learned a calmer path. They spoke of Gregory and Ruth Dr. Bills, a job that evaporated pride that refused charity, but welcomed what it could rename family. They did not speak of law. And why would they? Law is the room you don't see until someone turns the light on. I closed the app and put the tablet down as if I were laying a lid on a simmer. The kettle clicked off. The house crowded closer, not in menace, but in attention. 3 o'clock, I told the clock. Adrian's office sat above a bike shop on a side street in Boulder that still kept a bookstore and a barbershop in business. The waiting room was small and unsentimental, no wall of diplomas, just a rug that had decided years ago to hold its pattern. Adrienne herself was younger than I expected, with hair she hadn't had time to tame and a pencil behind her ear. She shook my hand the way people do who prefer to use both. "Ms. Vale," she said, and then before I had taken the chair across from her desk, "Tell me what you need to protect." It was the right verb. I told her the story without embroidery. She asked for the binder and read in the kind of silence that doesn't make you feel ignored. Every few pages she underlined something in pencil, a soft, exact sound that reassured me here's a person who still believes in graphite. Finally, she looked up. "Title to the cabin is vested in the Miriam Vale Living Trust. You are the sole trustee. That means you control who is permitted, who is excluded, and under what conditions. Your late husband signed as co-grantor. His interests merged into the trust by design when he died. The documents are clean." I had not realized I had been holding my shoulders up. I felt them lower a careful inch. "So if they show up with suitcases," I said, "I'm not helpless." "You are not helpless," she said, and it sounded like a fact, not comfort. "Here's the sequence." She divided a yellow legal pad into short lines, making a list that was already my list, but sharper. 1, I'll prepare a certification of trust and a short memorandum suitable for recording so any deputy can see from a parcel number alone exactly who speaks for the property. 2, we send written notices to your son, his wife, her parents stating they have no right to occupy and that any entry without permission is trespass. We will send by certified mail return receipt. 3, a log. Save texts, voicemails, dates, times. 4, a sign at the property. It's not legally necessary, but it removes doubt on the ground. She tapped the pad. "And a rule for you, Ms. Vale, you do nothing provocative. You do not change locks with anyone inside. You do not touch their belongings. If they enter, you call the sheriff, then you call me." I nodded. "What do I say if they come to my door?" I asked. "Say it once and then say it again if you must," she replied. "I love you." The answer is no. The cabin is trust property. I will not discuss it further. Then close the door. She slid the pencil behind her ear back into her fingers. "You don't need to litigate at your threshold." We signed an engagement letter. She printed the first drafts while I sat with my hands folded and listened to the firm's old laser printer hum. When she returned, she handed me a folder as carefully as a nurse hands a discharge packet. "This is your armor," she said. "Paper doesn't look like much until you need it." I wanted to tell her about the enamel mug and how a crack was evidence, not failure. Instead, I said, "Thank you," and meant it the way people mean thank you when a bridge appears right where they thought a river ended. On my way home, I stopped at a hardware store and bought a small aluminum plaque, "Private Property Trust Estate, no trespassing." I added 2 bolts and a wrench to the basket. The man at the counter asked if I needed anchors. "No," I said, and surprised us both with the certainty in my voice. That night, the house lay still as paper on a drafting table. I turned on the porch light and watched moths discover it, collide, choose again. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, and I let it buzz. Then I walked 3 houses down and knocked on a door I had knocked on before. Only at Christmas with cookies. Owen Pike, a security systems engineer whose garage looked like a tidy planet of wires. He opened wearing work glasses in humor. "Ms. Vale," he said, "did a raccoon find your bird feeder again, or are we on to larger mammals?" "Humans," I said. "I need the cabin to behave like it has a spine when I'm not there." He stepped back to let me in. "That I can do." We spread a map of the cabin on his workbench and talked in the shorthand of people who have built things with their hands. "I don't want a haunted house," I said. "No theater. Just clarity." "Clarity is the best deterrent," he agreed. "Discrete cameras with a redundant recorder. Motion-activated floods, not blue and red," he added. "We don't impersonate police. A recorded warning tied to a local statute number delivered calm and legal. If they push inside, the system lights the place up and calls you. If they cut power, a battery carries the essential pieces. You can watch it all from your tablet in Boulder." "And the faucets?" I asked, surprising myself. He grinned. "A loud building is a persuasive building. I can make the plumbing wake up without flooding anything. Loud water feels like trouble." "Do it," I said. We drove up 2 days later at dawn, his SUV heavy with gear that came in tidy black cases. Telluride's pines kept their counsel as always. The cabin aired that faint cedar sap smell that suggests memory has a fragrance, if you catch it early enough in the day. Owen set to work with the contentment of a man in his element cameras, tucked where eaves make shadows, a panel the size of a thin book hidden behind a closet shelf. A small speaker near the door that did not look like a speaker at all. Now, he said, handing me a tablet that had learned the cabin's name. If a mouse blinks too hard, you'll know. Here's the voice. He played the warning, a woman's tone neutral, unhurried. Attention, unauthorized entry is prohibited. This is trust property. Leave now. Then a reference to the relevant trespass law voiced with the same steadiness. No threats, Owen said. Only information. He demonstrated the flood's white light, not strobe, but bright enough to turn bravado into squinting. He toggled the water system. The kitchen and hall faucets burst to life with a roar and shut off. 10 seconds later, the sound both comic and commanding. They'll feel seen, he said, and most people don't like how that feels when they're pretending they belong. I stood in the doorway while he labeled wires, Alex rocker steady in my peripheral vision, and felt the strangest thing, not triumph, not safety, but companionship. The cabin was no longer just wood and memory. It could answer when I could not. Before we left, I tightened the aluminum plaque where the steps meet the porch rail. The wrench fit my hand the way a pen fits after a lifetime of teaching. When the bolts bit, I thought of signatures biting into paper and smiled without meaning to. Back in Boulder by late afternoon, I dropped a stack of certified envelopes at the post office, each stamped with a green receipt that looked comically small for what it promised to carry. At home, I slid a clean notebook into the trust binder, the log, and made the first entry in careful ink, date, time, notice mailed. My handwriting, which had suffered in grief, behaved. Night came, the way night comes in a house that has learned your rhythms. I did not pace. I did not practice speeches. I made tea, forgot to sip it, and watched the cabin's live feed in a small square of light. Pine shadow moved like slow water. Nothing happened, which is another way of saying everything I had set in motion was working the way good tools work, quietly, without asking to be thanked. The phone buzzed again. Thomas. I let it go to voicemail and didn't listen. I was saving everything now, even my own peace. I rinsed the enamel mug, traced the hairline crack with my thumb, and set it to dry. The kitchen clock counted out the simple obligation of seconds. In the study, I left Alex's chair angled toward the window and told it, tomorrow we finish the paperwork. It was like telling a road. Tomorrow we take you and not the one that wanders. The morning after Owen wired the cabin and Adrian stamped my folder with the first clean pages of law, I woke before the alarm as if my body wanted to be early to its own decision. I brewed tea I would forget to drink set. Alex's enamel mug within reach like a compass, and opened the blinds to a gray strip of sky that looked undecided. The house had a particular quiet, the kind that isn't empty so much as alert. By late evening, that alertness had turned into a restlessness I knew would not let me sleep. I cleared the table of everything but paper and a pen that wrote without scratching. For 3 years, I had avoided writing to Alec. There are distances you don't measure with ink, but I needed to hear my voice say certain things, even if it meant hearing them alone. I began simply, Alec. Today I put our name where it belongs, on the front of a folder that can answer when my throat goes dry. I thought love meant saying yes until the world quieted, but it turns out love needs edges or it spills everywhere and waters weeds. I told our son no. I said it aloud in the kitchen so the walls would know it, and they did. I paused, pressed my thumb along the rim of the mug, and kept the letter honest. I wrote about the porch and the 4 glasses. About the way grief can turn you into a person who buys peace at any price. About the way Adrian looked at a line of text and made it a door I could close without apology. I wrote that the cabin would not be taken by volume because the law does not shout, and neither do I when I am sure. When I signed my initial M, the letter looked less like a message to the dead and more like a promise to the living woman signing it. I folded the page and slid it into the back of Alex's woodworking notebook, the one with sawdust trapped forever in the spine. It felt right to let words sit beside measurements and joints. Both are ways to keep things from collapsing. The phone rang the next evening as the sun sank behind the row of maples like a coin slipping under a table. I did not check the screen. I knew the cadence of Thomas's ringtone the way mothers know the difference between a child calling from the yard and a child calling from the street. Mom, he said, skipping the preface he used to save for holidays. We're going up Saturday with a truck. Marina's parents are done moving for the 10th time. They need a place they can count on. We're making this simple. I looked at the mug half full and anchored my fingers around it. It isn't yours to give Thomas. It's family, he said, as if the word were a key that opened every lock. You barely go. You don't even ski anymore. Why keep a place empty out of what sentiment we can actually use it? The cabin isn't empty, I said. It's full of our labor. That matters. And it's held in trust. That matters too. He laughed once without humor. Listen to yourself. Held in trust. This is not a courtroom, Mom. It's a family trying to stop bleeding rent. It is both, I said. It's a family in law. Those two words don't cancel each other. Silence stretched taut as wire. Then he tried the angle I had expected. Dad would have wanted us there, he said. He said places are for people, not for memory. A heat rose in my chest that was not anger so much as protection. Don't use your father, I said quieter than I felt. He knew the difference between sharing and taking. He taught it to you. He exhaled hard into the receiver. You're making this ugly. No, I said with the calm you get when you've practiced the sentence in your bones. I'm making it clear. He escalated. If you block this, don't expect us at Thanksgiving. Don't expect calls. Don't expect children ever. The old reflex flared, the one that makes a parent grab for peace with both hands, even if it means dropping yourself. I let the reflex lift and pass like a small, ridiculous bird. Thomas, I said, and used Adrienne's sentence exactly the way she'd taught me to. I love you. The answer is no. The cabin is trust property. I'm not going to discuss it further. I said it once. He spoke over it. I said it again, word for word, like a boundary made of steady boards. He started another beat of argument. I ended the call. The sudden quiet rang. My hand trembled the way a bridge quivers after a heavy truck passes and everything is still standing. I set the phone down next to the mug and let the nervous system catch up to the spine. 2 nights later, they came to the door. The knock wasn't angry in volume. It was angry in tempo, fast, insistent, as if patience were an enemy. I opened to find Thomas leaning in with his shoulders and Marina beside him, arms crossed, perfume settling in the cold air like a bright scarf. We need to talk, he said, but it wasn't a request. I stepped back so we could all stand inside without touching. I've learned arguments shouldn't be held on thresholds. Doors have enough work to do. This is not sustainable, he began. Either you stop this legal nonsense or we step back. We have to protect our family, Mom. You are my family, I said. I am protecting it from a mistake. Marina's lips pressed into a practiced patience. My parents have been through hell, she said. He lost his job. My mother's health isn't a headline, it's pills lined up on a counter. We're trying to make sure they aren't humiliated again in 6 months when a landlord changes his mind. My sympathy is not in question, I said, and meant it. But need isn't ownership. Asking is different from announcing. So, you're really choosing a building over us, Thomas said. The sentence sharpened to wound. I'm choosing dignity over coercion, I answered. There's a difference. You'll recognize it later. He stared at me as if waiting for the old choreography, my voice softening my offer to pay my plea for closeness. The offers did not arrive. What arrived was a steadiness I had not felt since we taught him to ride a bike without grabbing the back of the seat. Then this is on you, he said finally. Don't expect us to fix it. It isn't broken, I said. It's finally straight. Marina tugged his sleeve small and sharp. They left with the kind of exit that wants to be remembered, the door rattling in its frame as if to produce one last echo. I steadied the door with my palm and waited until the air went back to the volume of breathing. Saturday came with a sky that had made up its mind, bright, cold, honest. I set the tablet on the desk in my small study where Alex Rocker watched the window and opened the cabin's feed. Owen's icons glowed polite and green. At 1:11 p.m., an SUV nosed into the gravel like a ship that had decided on a harbor. Thomas climbed out first, his stride already translating body into claim. Marina followed, sunglasses in her hair, directing traffic the way some people imagine leadership looks. Gregory and Ruth emerged carefully, one with 2 hard-sided suitcases, the other with a floral bag tucked under her arm like a hope she dared not put down. Big one first, Marina called, pointing as if the house worked for her. They climbed the steps. Ruth's hand touched the knob. The floodlights came on, a clean white certainty that erased shadows. The small speaker just above the jamb carried a woman's voice, even and without heat. Attention. Unauthorized entry is not permitted. This property is held in trust. Please leave the premises. Then the statute number, not barked, not dramatized, simply stated the way people name streets. Gregory jerked his head up like a man hearing his name in a place he didn't expect to be known. It's a recording, Thomas said, impatient with his own heartbeat. Ignore it. He pushed the door. The hall lights rose to bright. 10 seconds later, the kitchen and bath faucets opened with a brazen roar, the sound of the building asserting itself. I watched from Boulder, my fingers pressed together so I wouldn't clench. Someone is in there, Ruth whispered, her voice shaking a little, and I felt the distant tug of pity for a woman whose face I had only ever seen set in judgment. No one's inside, Gregory said, but even his certainty had scuff marks. The water cut off. The speaker spoke again, identical to the first time. It's amazing how unnerving consistency can be to people who believe they can outtalk a rule. Marina pulled her phone out. Call the sheriff, she told Thomas, right now. Let's force this into the open. It took 8 minutes for the county car to swing into the drive, lights turning, but siren quiet. 2 deputies stepped out with the ordinary competence of people who have been to porches on worse days than this. I saw their boots, the posture of their shoulders, the way one scanned the tree line without looking like he was scanning the tree line at all. They listened to Thomas first, familiar in every family dispute I've ever overheard. Speed, volume, a lot of we and need. Marina added efficient footnotes. Gregory attempted gruff authority. Ruth worked at a trembling that made me want to hand her a chair. The older deputy held up a palm in a gesture that slowed the air. Documents, he said, not texts, paper. Thomas gestured at the door. It's my mother's place. Then your mother's paper will be the paper we look at, the deputy said, as if explaining weather. He turned to the door and knocked. Owen's system paused the floods. The deputy stepped inside, looked once, and came back out, shaking his head slightly. House is secured, he told his partner. System's legit. From his clipboard, the deputy pulled a sheet I recognized, even through the tablet's glare. Adrian's certification, the memorandum with the parcel number and the trust name already recorded and mirrored in the county's system. He didn't perform it. He simply held it where faces could read. This property is titled to a living trust, he said plain. Trustee's name is here. That person decides who's a guest. If you stay after a lawful warning, we treat it as trespass. Nobody wants that outcome. The driveway went still in the particular way things go still, when a story changes its tense from future to past. Thomas's jaw worked. Marina's eyes scanned for a tactic that wasn't there. Gregory looked away from the paper and toward the trees as if the pines might take a side. Ruth pressed her hand to her chest. Gather your belongings, the deputy added, not unkindly. Move along. If humiliation has a sound, it is the zipper on a suitcase that had expected to be unpacked. They obeyed because the body knows when a wall is a wall. Thomas lifted the bag with too much force and then had to adjust his grip, a tiny choreography that said more than anything he had shouted all week. As they loaded the SUV, the younger deputy glanced up toward Owen's small camera. Maybe not knowing exactly where it was, but knowing someone was watching, and said half to himself, half to the house. Whoever set this up did it right. It wasn't praise so much as report. I felt it land like a weight removed from a shelf. They drove away without looking back, gravel spitting a little as the tires found the road. The cabin returned to itself with a soft recalibration of a place that prefers being a place to being a battleground. The floods dimmed, the faucets slept. A quick wind lifted the needles and let them fall again as if the forest had shrugged. I sat very still. The tremor in my hands found its way out and left. Relief is a quiet animal when it finally arrives. It doesn't jump on the bed. It curls somewhere warm and lets you breathe even in your lower ribs. I wanted to feel triumphant. I did not. I wanted to feel vindicated. I felt something better correct. Not as in morally superior, but as in aligned Paperwire's voice and decision all pointing the same direction. The tablet pinged with a local news alert. An hour later, some small item about a property dispute, resolved by deputies near Telluride, a grainy photo of a familiar SUV slipping away. I didn't click through. The court of gossip never hands out verdicts I need. Adrienne called that evening to make sure I was steady. You handled it as cleanly as possible, she said. Document everything and rest. I thanked her and stood in the kitchen afterward without turning on the lights, watching the street lamps make coins on the pavement. In the quiet, I could hold more than one truth at once. Gregory had been humbled by a job loss. Ruth was ill. Marina was wired to push. My son had learned that push as a language and used it without translating. Compassion does not require surrender. Surrender is not a synonym for love. These sentences kept their shape even when I tried to bend them. I opened the log notebook and wrote down the times, the names, the deputy's remarks in words as plain as he had used. Then I turned the page and wrote something else, something I had not planned to put in ink yet. Decide what the cabin is for, not who it is for. What? The difference mattered. Ownership had defended me this week. Purpose would have to carry me farther than defense can travel. Alec had built that porch to hold the weight of more than two people. Maybe it was time I trusted his carpentry. Before bed, I took the enamel mug to the sink and washed it. The way you wash a thing you mean to keep rim interior. The little place where the handle meets the body, where grime likes to learn your habits. The hairline crack shone and then didn't depending on how the light landed. That's what survival looks like, visible from some angles, invisible from others, intact all the same. I carried the mug to Alec's rocker, set it on the side table, and sat on the sofa across from it. For the first time since the porch confrontation, I let myself picture Thomas as a small boy counting pine cones into a bucket, cheeks red from air and effort turning toward me to show his math. The ache came clean, not tearing. I let it sit. Love without boundaries had turned me into a faucet that never shut off. I had found the handle. The water was doing what water is supposed to do, again run when invited, rest when not. The next morning, the air over Boulder was bright and thin, the kind of air that makes paper feel crisp. I carried the trust folder under my arm and walked to the small copy shop that still rings up jobs by hand when the printer jams. I made 3 more sets. I bought a stamped envelope for Adrienne's next filing without needing to ask the weight. Back home, I slid a fresh index card into the binder pocket beside the one with my name and wrote 2 words that sounded like direction more than strategy: forward use. Saturday had taught me that defense works. Part 4. Whether I was ready to name it or not would have to be about what the cabin would mean when the fight stopped echoing. I was not done being a trustee. I was done being a hostage. The tablet showed only pines and a blue stripe of water. The house here showed only morning. I drank my tea before it cooled for once. When the phone buzzed with a new voicemail from Thomas, I saved it without pressing play. I had learned a new sequence, Paperwire's Quiet No. It led not to a storm but to clear weather. And in that weather, I could finally look beyond the fence I had built and ask a better question. What do you do with a place that has held your life once you've made sure no one can take it? I didn't have the full answer yet, but I knew where to go looking. The morning after I wrote forward use in the log, I called Adrienne and told her I didn't want the cabin to exist as a fort forever. Defense had done its work. It was time for direction. She didn't waste words. Then let's put the purpose on paper, she said. Once purpose is written, people can't pull you back into argument. They have to walk in the path you've laid. We met that afternoon. Her office smelled faintly of lemon oil and toner, 2 kinds of clean. I brought the gray binder and a file of names I had collected over the years without admitting it to myself. Organizations that offered families somewhere to breathe after hospitals, places that understood the medicine of quiet. From that list, we chose North Star Respite, a small nonprofit that ran short retreats for veterans caregivers and for families rebuilding after loss. The board chair, a practical woman named Dana Ortiz, answered Adrienne's call on the second ring, and after hearing the outline said, if Ms. Vale is truly sure, we'd be honored to steward it. But we'll only accept if she keeps a life right to use the place. Houses don't like to be abandoned. I laughed, as surprised by relief. I agree, I said into the speakerphone. Alec wouldn't forgive me for giving away the porch entirely. Over the next week, Adrienne drafted a gift deed with a reserved life estate ink that allowed me to keep the cabin as my place to live in. Visit, repair, grieve, and breathe for as long as I keep breathing, while setting its future beyond anyone's reach who might try to take it by sentiment or noise. She added the certification language we had already recorded and a simple letter of intent that read in her spare style, the donor wishes the property to be used for rest restoration and small kindnesses. It was exactly the sort of sentence Alec would have admired. On signing day, a light snow made Boulder look like it remembered how to be gentle. Adrienne slid the stack across the conference table, tabs like flags. My hand was steady. If grief had once taught my signature to stutter, purpose cured the tremor. When my name dried on the last page, Adrienne closed the folder with a palm that felt almost ceremonial. It's done, she said. If your son's lawyer calls, the law will meet them at the first step and turn them around. And if anyone asks what you did, tell them you gave the cabin a job. We filed at the county. The clerk stamped without commentary, the kind of public ritual I trust most. Paper changed a future quietly, the way frost alters a field thoroughly without argument. North Star Respite asked for a brief visit the following week to learn the house. Dana arrived with 2 staffers who carried notebooks instead of cameras. They listened as I showed them the drawer in the kitchen that sticks when it rains, and the windows that prefer to be coaxed rather than forced. They took notes on where the sun lands in winter and which shelf keeps tea tins cool. When we stepped onto the porch, Dana looked up at the ridge like a nurse checking a pulse. This place already knows how to hold people, she said softly. We'll try not to get in its way. We kept the ceremony small. A thermos of coffee on a folding table, 3 board members, 2 volunteers, Owen, Adrienne, and me. No speeches, only short sentences. Dana thanked me for trusting strangers. I thanked them for promising not to make the house into a brand. Owen stood by the rail, pleased to see a building wear the voice he had wired, and promised to donate monitoring. Adrienne stood back as if guarding the edges of a thing she had brought safely to shore. They unveiled a narrow plaque on the cedar near the door, brushed steel on wood. The inscription was spare, given by Miriam Vale in memory of Alec Vale for rest, repair, and quiet courage. The words landed in my chest and then settled like stones that knew where to live. I touched Alec's name as if it were a cool coin, a habit I wasn't ready to give up and didn't need to. Not long after Thomas came alone at dusk. He stood on my porch with his hands empty, which felt like the first honest thing he'd done in months. I opened the door and let the evening air do the talking until he found words. I thought you'd always pick me, he said, voice raw around the edges. I didn't understand there was a difference between picking me and letting me take. He looked past me toward the table where the enamel mug sat. I was wrong. I didn't rush the moment. Adrienne's sentence had turned into a way of breathing. You hurt me, I said level. You'll have to find out what repair looks like in you. I won't map it for you. I stepped aside so the light fell on the threshold. But the door isn't locked. It just doesn't swing on demand. He nodded slowly. There were no bargains, no lists. Only a man learning where the ground holds and where it slides. He swallowed, wiped at a tear he didn't hide, and asked the question that sounded younger than he meant it to. Will I ever sit on that porch again? You'll sit on porches you build, I said. And maybe one day you'll understand why I had to make sure I didn't disappear from mine. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize with theater. He said, "Thank you, and I'm sorry," in a voice that made both sentences equal in size, then turned and went down the steps. I watched his back and realized forgiveness would not be a door I kicked open or nailed shut. It would be something I checked on like a plant-watered prune left alone when meddling would do harm. A week later, North Star brought their first small group, 2 couples who had learned the hard grammar of hospitals, a father and daughter who hadn't managed a quiet breakfast since grief moved, and a young man whose nightmares made sleep bargain with him every night. They arrived with the cautious posture of people who are wary of hope. The house did the welcoming so I didn't have to. It made soft noises in the kitchen while water came to a boil. The porch gave the wind a job. The lake kept its stillness like a kept promise. I stayed out of the way, using the life estate the way I intended to, not as a loophole but as a way to keep breathing there without turning into a proprietor. Dana joined me on the steps at dusk. We cradled paper cups, and for a while we didn't talk at all. "You know," she said at last, "women like us spend years giving until we fade out of our own pictures. What you've done, you gave without vanishing." I let the sentence land. It didn't fix anything. It didn't need to. It named what had been unnameable while I tried to buy love with yes. I looked at the plaque at the line "Quiet Courage" and thought of the deputy's simple verdict in the driveway. You did it right. Right wasn't loud. Right was aligned. When the group left, there was a hush that felt earned. Someone had washed the coffee carafe with care. Someone had oiled Alex's rocker without being told. On the side table lay a folded note on North Star letterhead in a round hand that reminded me of first-grade teachers. Thank you. The house made room for us. I put the note in the gray binder because paper likes company. Back in Boulder, I took the enamel mug from the rack, the hairline crack catching light like a faint seam in a lake at noon. I ran my thumb along it and thought of everything cracks can mean: not failure, not an apology, just proof of surviving impact. I poured hot water. Steam curled up as if to remind me that heat rises when given space. I sat across from Alex's empty chair and listened to the house count its small, faithful sounds, the tick of a modest clock, the sigh of the vent, the page of a book turning upstairs in a neighbor's apartment. This is the music of an ordinary life regained. No brass section, no drum line, just rhythm. I didn't lose the cabin. Losing is something that happens to you. I chose where it would go the way you choose where to plant a tree so its shade falls in the right place years from now. The law guarded the deed. Owen's wires guarded the door. My quiet guarded the rest. And the line I drew, polite, unwavering, gave back everything it had asked me to set down. When I drove up alone the next weekend, the pines shifted in familiar greeting. I parked, tightened the small aluminum sign with a half-turn of the wrench out of habit, and climbed the steps. On the cedar near the door, the plaque caught a band of afternoon light and sent it back gently. I set the enamel mug on the rail. The steam found the cold and made a small ghost that wandered then disappeared. I touched Alex's name and said, not as a speech, not as a prayer, only as a fact. The house knows what it's for now. The lake made no answer. It didn't need to. The air was clean. The boards under my feet were honest. And the porch, his favorite meter, kept time while I sat still and let the long work of peace continue cup by cup, breath by breath, without anyone else deciding my place. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.